I would like to begin by acknowledging the original indigenous stewards of the land that I stand upon today, the Tataviam people, and their elders past and present. It is an honor and pleasure to be with you today. Dankalun Nasijus Masi, thank you very much to EatDenver and their wonderful team for this opportunity to speak and this space to share. Hafade Todas Hamzu, Guahusi Mariah Kunkel, Familian Kitsutsu, Tatout Zugitsa Barigada, Lao Pago Sumasigat Zugitsa, Los Angeles. Through my father, I am Chamorro, one of the indigenous people native to the Mariana Archipelago in the West Pacific. My family is from Guahan, or Guam, the largest southernmost island in the Marianas. As I just mentioned, our family name is Kitsu, and we are from the village of Barigada, though I currently live in Los Angeles. The Marianas are divided into two separate territories, or colonies, that are administered by the United States. You may be familiar with the term Guamanian as a descriptor for people from Guam. However, this umbrella term covers those who are native to the island and those who are not, and it is falling out of fashion among those who are indigenous descent, whose ancestors historically lived and moved throughout the archipelago freely. I would also like to make clear that I am Micronesian. I am not Polynesian. While all Polynesians are Pacific Islanders, all Pacific Islanders are not Polynesian. And further, these categories that we call ourselves by today were given to us by outsiders. Our ancestors did not recognize these boundaries or classifications. I work in the spirits industry, primarily on the supplier side, working with artisanal brands and craft producers on marketing, education, branding, and social media. I am one of the co-founders of Pacifica Project, along with my colleagues Samuel Jimenez and Scott Langley. Pacifica Project is a hospitality-focused collective founded by and for individuals of oceanic descent within the industry. Our guiding principles are community, education, and support. We envision a visible, thriving, and diverse Pacific Islander community within the hospitality industry, rooted in a strong connection to the wider Pacifica diaspora, where we can honor our cultures, tell our own stories, support our communities, and navigate paths to professional and personal success. We frequently provide educational resources, give seminars and participate in industry panels, consult on bar programs, and provide media interviews on the subject of tiki. However, tiki is not our primary focus, but neither is destroying it. Our primary focus is on creating community, providing support for our people, and sustaining our cultures. And secondary to that is providing an indigenous context to the evolving conversations about tiki and Pacific culture. This is because Pacifica Project was born out of found community, and that is what we hope to cultivate in the world. At the end of the day, how people feel about tiki is their own decision to make. We counter the stereotypes and colonial motives found within tiki by proudly and authentically existing, and with education and cultural exchange. My background and family history gives me a particular point of view on tiki. Before we dive in, I would just like to say that I don't make a claim to speak for anyone else, and that there is no Pacific monolith. I also readily acknowledge that having this conversation during a global pandemic, where many of our beloved bars and restaurants are desperately trying to survive, is a thought exercise riddled with privilege. Actually disrupting a business that provides for families and creates jobs for others at a time when most folks are struggling is a tall order. I am especially thankful for those business owners who are taking part in this conversation. And I am very grateful for those who have already and continue to make changes that could impact their company's success. It is my hope that respect, change, and business can coexist. Briefly, tiki is a uniquely American hospitality style that is tropical, theatrical, and dramatic. The fantasy is meant to be fun and perhaps thrilling. It seeks to transport you to another time and place through food, drink, and ambiance, frequently invoking feelings of a vacation or a getaway. It is highly stylized escapism. From its creation in Los Angeles in 1934 by Ernest Gantt at his bar Don the Beachcomber, tiki has borrowed from a number of traditions from around the world. The food is usually some sort of Asian fusion prepared for an American palate. The drinks largely feature Caribbean rums. While the decor and ambiance is primarily drawn from what is frequently referred to as Polynesian, but it operates as a stand-in for the region of Pacifica at large. The Pacific Ocean, the single largest physical feature on the planet, was divided into three subregions, Micronesia, Melanesia, and Polynesia, by two different Frenchmen in the 1700s. These divisions did not exist among the indigenous people who lived there. The ocean connected these islands via trade, war, marriage, and migration. They are properly viewed as an interconnected sea of islands, as writer and scholar Dr. Epeli Haofa described them in his seminal essay of the same name. The Pacific is also a highly colonized region of the world, beginning in 1521 with the arrival of Magellan on Guam, continuing through the 1700s with Captain Cook's voyages in Polynesia for Britain, through the illegal US-backed overthrow of the Kingdom of Hawaii in 1898, and the continued holding of the colonies of American Samoa, Guam, and the Northern Mariana Islands, as well as the administration of the Kofa countries of the Marshall Islands, Palau, and the Federated States of Micronesia by the United States. As Dr. Teresia Tewa suggested in her 1999 essay, Militarism, Feminism, and the Polynesian Body, that for outsiders, the Pacific region is largely perceived as a place for military outposts and vacation destinations, where locals are merely players in a strategic and commercial space where European, American, and Asian desires are played out. The military ensures the smooth running of the hospitality industry, while the relaxed tourism in turn masks the ongoing military occupation by foreign nations. Tiki also perpetuates these perceptions of Pacifica as merely an idyllic vacation destination, while centering a specific point of view as the main character in its fantasy, using cultural elements to create exoticism. But exotic to whom? The Pacific is not exotic to the people who live there, nor to those who are descended from the cultures that originate from there. With tiki mugs and plastic flowers and subservient and smiling hula girls, Tiki glosses over the very real issues faced by those natives to the islands to preserve the tropical fantasy. It hides the resource extraction and settler colonization with dance reviews and the thrill of the fire knife. The representations of colonized people are distillations of imperial ideologies and motives. They reflect colonized people's value within colonial cultural and economic systems and inform how indigenous people should be treated by society. They can also shape how colonized people feel about themselves. Tiki, a dominant source of the representations of Pacifica consumed by the general public, is properly viewed as part of the ongoing structure of settler colonization. Tiki's exaggerated stereotypes of the people and the cultures of the Pacific are still commonplace. Notions of cannibalism, headhunting, paganism, primitivism, and drunkenness, as well as the sexual objectification of indigenous women. The different periods of Tiki's development are marked by waves. The first wave began with Dog and the Beachcomber in the 1930s. The second wave occurred after World War II with the return home of veterans who served in the Pacific Theater. The third wave is where we currently find ourselves, infused with new spirit from the craft cocktail movement, as well as marked interest in mid-century nostalgia. However, I'd like to talk about the next wave, or envisioning a way forward. Where do we go from here, armed with the knowledge that Tiki contains problematic elements and should evolve? How do we construct something that's more honest, perhaps authentic, more inclusive, and genuinely hospitable to everyone? How do we create opportunities to celebrate and preserve living cultures? How do we create transportative experiences without weaving a fantasy that is riddled with white supremacy or colonialism? Quite simply, we have to commit to doing the work, commit to making positive change. Doing this work isn't simply finishing off a checklist or throwing away your tiki mugs or joining a book club or just adopting a new vocabulary. This work is ongoing and it will not necessarily make everyone feel good at all times. To evolve Tiki, we need to face some of its uncomfortable truths in order to deconstruct its stereotypical representation and sexual objectifications, cease appropriating cultural elements, and decenter its default point of view. To do that, we need folks with open minds and a willingness to change. We must have people come to the table to have this conversation, even if it's difficult. We must cultivate dialogue. Frequently, I find myself on the receiving end of charges of trying to cancel Tiki, even once on Tucker Carlson. I must confess that I don't think cancel culture truly exists, at least not in the way that pundits like to throw it around. As a society, the act of calling attention to something that is harmful or abusive is often the only tangible tactic available to those without the social, political, or professional power to immediately compel meaningful change. And we've always done that. What's different now is the modes through which we communicate. They've made the voices louder, the speeds quicker, and in more cases, real-world consequences attaching more quickly. I would challenge you to frame this conversation about Tiki and potentially other conversations that you're having around diversity, inclusion, and equity in terms of accountability rather than cancellation. Cancellation alienates, it shuts down. Accountability and the ownership that it requires emanates from a place of harm prevention and compassion. It seeks to course correct. It acknowledges the harm that has been done, even if it wasn't intended. It strives to find common ground to build a stronger foundation upon. It shares knowledge. It listens more than it speaks. Accountability doesn't require perfection at all times, but it also won't come easy. It learns and is open to changing its opinion when presented with new facts or context. I would love for you to keep in mind when it comes to Tiki that it is linked to several larger issues that continue to impact Pacific Islanders today. Escapism doesn't necessarily require the use of any cultural elements to be achieved, especially when merely used as a prop or a shortcut to spice up an experience. I strongly believe that we can work together to change Tiki for the better, to create hospitable places for everyone to enjoy, while simultaneously supporting the preservation of Pacifica's people, culture, and islands. Please honor and support these living cultures now, by providing space for Indigenous chefs to share their foods and customs, by patronizing Indigenous artists and artisans, by employing cultural practitioners, etc. Please go straight to the source and contribute to the honest, authentic representation of Pacifica, rather than purchasing knockoffs or making crude approximations. I also urge the support of charitable organizations focusing on the needs of the Pacifica community, as well as learning about the issues that flow from colonization and continue to impact the region and diaspora, such as militarization, nuclear testing and nuclear waste, climate change and ocean health, poverty, homelessness and incarceration, desecration of sacred lands and cultural preservation, and decolonization and independence for places like Guam and West Papua. One place that you can start is on the Pacifica Project website, which has an evolving list of resources that prioritizes Indigenous voices. Diversify your social feeds with Pacifica artists and activists. Get in touch with us at Pacifica Project if you'd like to talk, because our goal is not to simply tell folks what they should not be doing. Our goal is to engage. We want to talk through complex issues to construct a better future for everyone, while uplifting and representing the beauty and diversity of Pacifica as honestly as we can. We would hope for the interest and enthusiasm for Tiki to extend to the survival of our people, our cultures, and our islands, because we are currently at risk. We love sharing our culture. Our spirit of hospitality is undeniable, and we definitely love fun. I am very excited to see the future that we build together. I will leave you with the words of Dr. Hau'ofa that continue to guide my own work. We should not be defined by the smallness of our islands, but by the greatness of our oceans. We are the sea, we are the ocean. Oceania is us. We must wake up to this ancient truth and together overturn all hegemonic views that aim ultimately to confine us again, physically and psychologically. It is time to create things for ourselves, to create established standards of excellence that match those of our ancestors. Sijis Masi, thank you very much for your time.